For over a decade, she was the most powerful woman in Scotland. A working-class girl from Ayrshire who became the driving force for independence. It was a dream she fought for tooth and nail, dealt a crushing blow when her country voted no. But in the moment of defeat, she made history, becoming leader of the SNP and Scotland's first female First Minister.
To become the leader of the party that I joined as a teenager is the biggest privilege of my life.
Her time in power was turbulent. She tried twice more for another independence vote.
Together.
She led Scotland through a global pandemic, a burden she says she bore heavily.
I wanted to be the best First Minister I could be during that period. It's for others to judge the extent to which I succeeded.
Her dream team partnership for independence with Alex Salmond fell apart in devastating fashion. Her mentor was to be charged and later acquitted of multiple sexual assault allegations. Sturgeon would be dragged into the scandal, accused of conspiring against him. Then came the storm over gender recognition reform, a toxic debate which shook her grip of the party and fuelled rage against her position.
Are all trans women women?
That's not the point that we're dealing with
That's
here.
the question I'm asking.
Trans women are women.
In 2023, she stepped down as First Minister, saying it was time for a new chapter. But just 8 days later, the police were at her door, their investigation into SNP finances engulfing her home. She would be cleared, but her husband, Peter Murrell, the SNP chief executive, was charged with embezzling party funds. From the heights of leading a nation to fighting for her reputation, now Nicola Sturgeon wants to tell her story in her own words. As she prepares to launch her autobiography, we visit Dunure in Ayrshire, her favourite childhood spot, and sit down with her to talk leadership, legacy and loss, and what comes next. You talk about the book as being a lifeline, writing it, and therapy. I mean, what was that therapy for? It's a strong word to use.
I mean, obviously, the last 2 years of my life have been torrid, and the most difficult period in my life, and most of it has played out across the media, so people will know what I'm talking about. You know, finding myself at the centre of a police investigation under suspicion for a couple of years, all the while knowing I had done nothing wrong. And you know, that experience took me to some very, very dark moments in my mind, moments that I briefly wondered how and if I could lift myself out of.
It sounds like you were really shaken by the fact that people who had been admirers of yours, had had faith in you as a politician, were starting to look at you in a very different way.
I worried. I knew I'd done nothing wrong. And I guess being able to hold on to that was one of the other things that allowed me to pull myself through it. But the whole no smoke without fire is a really basic human instinct. We all have it if somebody's accused of something that we might think, well, that's maybe not true, but there's always a little part of your brain saying, well, no smoke without fire. So I was just totally shaken to my core. And I desperately tried, and I think succeeded more than I might have expected to keep going. There was something in me that if you don't keep doing it, if you don't keep putting one foot in front of another, if you don't keep moving forward, what happens to you then? You just sink into this kind of nightmare. And so I forced myself to keep going. And and I guess that's the thing I'm saying. It was really, really dark and really, really difficult. If you'd described it to me in advance, I would have said, I won't survive that.
Nicola Sturgeon, by the time you stood down as leader, there was already a well-reported and growing scandal, and not least a police investigation around the finances of the SNP. Did you genuinely have no idea that at some point there was going to be a knock on the door?
Absolutely had no idea. I mean, I know people, I totally understand that people will look at the chronology of events now and think, she's not serious, but genuinely that is the case. And what I would say to people, and again, I know people think politicians are not, human in the way everybody else is, but anybody who knew me or worked in close proximity to me during the period between me announcing I was standing down and stepping down will tell you that I was more relaxed than I'd been in ages. I was kind of happier. I was looking forward to, it was a massive step I was taking, but I was looking forward to what lay ahead. The idea that I could have been like that, knowing what was coming, just defies any kind of logic. And obviously I knew there was an investigation underway, but what transpired in that morning in April was, utterly shocking, utterly traumatic, and utterly unexpected. I was 8 days, I think, out of being First Minister. So I was in bed, I was asleep. And I was vaguely aware of Peter going downstairs. I think I was vaguely aware that the doorbell had rung or something. I can't remember that properly. And then literally the next thing I knew, I was up and the police were in my house and he was being arrested and they had a search warrant. I went into a kind of shock state. I remember distinctly, like I had to go somewhere and I think, where the hell am I going to go? And I did phone my mum and ended up going to my mum and dad's. And I'm glad I did, because that was the only place I really wanted to be.
What was it like when you saw Peter being led away?
I don't really have a clear memory of that, because I think I'd gone upstairs to kind of get myself ready, and so I don't really...
But the idea of him being taken out of your family home by the police...
So I don't know, and I genuinely don't know whether the fact that I don't have a clear image of that in my head is because I didn't witness it, or that I have kind of somehow blocked it out. It wasn't until I got to my mum and dad's that I saw the pictures of my house, looking like a murder scene, effectively. And yeah, it was just... Sorry, I'm just working out that it's really hard to articulate how I felt that day. It was like being, I don't know, it's a cliched way of describing it, but it is the only way I can think of in the moment. It was like an out-of-body experience. I was kind of looking in on this from outside, and this dystopian kind of scene was unfolding. I think I stayed at Mum and Dad's for a couple of days and then went home, and
that key in the door
the moment of opening my door, because I had no idea. Like most people, you read things about what a house looks like after the police have searched it, and I literally had no idea what I was walking back into. And I remember I felt sick as I put the key in the door and walked back in my front door. And actually, you wouldn't have known anybody had been in the house. It was almost, looked to me to be completely untouched. But something had changed in this place that throughout all of my time as First Minister,
and all of your married life,
and all of my married life, and a bit before moved into that house, before we were married, had been this. It was the place I would come home to at the end of a working week, or a terrible day at the office, and shut the door and feel safe and secure, and suddenly it didn't feel like that anymore. And if I'm being honest, I don't think it ever felt like that again. It was still my home. I've had to live there, and yeah.
It's obviously affected you pretty deeply.
I had this sense of horror and upset and, the kind of shame of it all.
There was another clear punctuation point. You described Sunday, June the 11th, worst day of your life. You're arrested. you have to attend a police station. You're there for hours. To go from First Minister, this lauded female politician, to walking into a police station for questioning. How was that?
Horrific. I think part of me just closed down.
What did the police want to know?
I can't go into that
I know
right
it's
now.
very difficult.
I just can't. And I don't think you could air it even if I did, because these proceedings are still live, so I can't go into the detail of that.
Do you stand by that you knew nothing? There are people out there who, whatever you say, find it really hard to believe that. Here was the party leader, the party chief exec, married for years. They just can't believe that.
So the police themselves said they had, robustly, exhaustively, I can't remember the term they used, looked at all the evidence. If there had been any evidence that I had done anything that constituted a criminal offence, I wouldn't be sitting here right now having been cleared by the police.
How is Peter?
He is obviously going through something that is horrendously difficult for anybody, and he's coping with it and getting through it.
How is he coping?
I don't know. We're separated. It actually wouldn't be fair, because I don't know the answer to that question in the way that I might once have done.
Did you think there was an issue? That there was sometimes a sense that as a couple you were sort of invincible and untouchable?
No,
Alex Salmond said you should never have had that situation.
I've spent most of my life and most of my career thinking I'm not good enough, I have to do more to prove myself. So this idea that I ever, either in the context of my marriage or my individual career, ever thought I'm unbeatable, I'm invincible. And I don't think I've had a nanosecond in my life of thinking that.
Let's rewind then to the independence referendum of 2014. So 2011, with Alex Salmond at the helm, SNP gets a clear majority, 69 out of 129 seats. David Cameron then grants you that independence referendum. You admit the SNP was no way near ready for it.
We weren't. David Cameron at that point kind of took us by surprise. We weren't really expecting him to do what he did in the moment he did it. And we were, I think, caught a bit off guard. We hadn't done, to be candid, enough of the substantive heavy lifting work that we then, did in advance of the vote in 2014. So we were playing a bit of catch-up for quite some time.
You said we had rudimentary top-line answers, but on very few big issues, arguably none, did we have positions that would withstand the full glare of scrutiny in a referendum campaign.
And that we went from, what had been the case, we supported independence, we argued for it in a very sort of big picture way, the other side said it was a terrible idea. But as soon as it became clear that there was actually going to be a referendum, the scrutiny went up several gears, and that's what we weren't ready for in that moment. I think and it's a self-criticism as much as a collective criticism of the SNP at that point, is we didn't then, I think, accelerate our preparations as much as we should have done. It probably wasn't until later into 2012 that we really started to get our act together on some of these big questions.
And that all coalesced around the white paper that was published ahead of the referendum, which you were overseeing. You were what was known as the Yes Minister.
The Yes Minister.
The solution was to draft this white paper. I mean, this nearly drove you mad, didn't it?
I remember an evening which I just suddenly had this overwhelming sense of impossibility. I can't get this to the point it needs to be at. It's so unwieldy, it's so difficult. And I just remember having what I can only describe as a panic attack. I was sobbing on the floor of my office at home, and just my heart was racing, and it was just this sense of responsibility. This was the document that so much rested on. I believed, and in retrospect still believe, that it was pivotal in the referendum campaign, and yet here was I a few weeks before it was due to go to print, and I still didn't think it was in the state it needed to be. And it was just, I think it was one of these moments where just the weight of the responsibility of the whole independence campaign just felt overwhelming.
And it was at this point that Alex Salmond was really showing very little interest in the white paper.
He really didn't engage in the work of the drafting or the compilation of the white paper at all. He was the leader, he was First Minister, and he hadn't read it. And
he hadn't read it at this crucial run-up?
He hadn't read it. He'd maybe read bits. I don't even know if he'd read bits of it. I knew I was going to have to sit him down and say, look, you're going to have to read this and you're going to have to tell me now if there are bits you want to change because it has to be signed off. He told me he was going on a trade mission to China. And I, in all of the many years that we worked together, you know, high points, low points, as of that point, I don't think I'd ever felt as much cold fury at him as I did in that moment. It just seemed to me like an abdication of responsibility.
And he called you from Hong Kong, not necessarily in a sober state.
A call came through, and it was Alec, who'd been at horse racing. He was a big lover of horse racing, and he'd obviously had quite a lot to drink at the horse racing, and this was him phoning in an inimitable Alex style, which I loved sometimes as well as loathed at times, to give me some tips for First Minister's questions. I think I hung up on him.
I mean, a lot of it looked like chaos. You were supposed to be the dream team. He was making it pretty hard for you, you argue. Was this somebody on whose shoulders the future of an independent Scotland should ever have rested, in your view?
Look, Alec, and we'll leave to one side what later transpired in the relationship between Alec and me, but Alec was one of these people. He was, at times, utterly brilliant. And at moments in the referendum campaign, he was utterly brilliant. But there were other times where he would not be. He would, you know, not necessarily get as close to the detail as he should have done, or not be as involved as he should have done. You know, there were times where he could be really difficult.
You talk about that attempt for your first attempt to get another referendum in 2017, and you write, if it's possible for a decision to be both absolutely right and catastrophically wrong, that's what this was. And the truth of it was that it was in the middle of political chaos. You misread Scotland.
I think in principle it was the right decision. Scotland had been put in this position that was democratically wrong, that it was going to lose EU membership against its wishes. I think because there was lots of people, you know, that were contacting me who'd voted no in 2014, who were now suddenly reconsidering the issue of independence. I equated that too much with a kind of readiness and an eagerness to actually make that decision. I still believe if Theresa May hadn't called that snap election in 2017, and there had been more time for things to play out, then maybe I would have ended up not being as wrong as people now judge I was. That can't be proved one way or the other. But certainly suddenly having to fight an election in this very uncomfortable place of, to a lot of people, sounding as if, and this is not what I was doing, but sounding as if I was trying to take Brexit and immediately exploit it for this thing that I had spent my whole life campaigning for, was an uncomfortable experience.
You marched the troops up to the top of the hill, not once in 2017, but you did it again in the wake of the 2019 general election, where the SNP had a resounding success in terms of the number of seats at Westminster. I mean, this is a lot to take a country through in such a short spell, twice up the hill and down again. Is there any point where you think, you know, do I need to apologise to Scotland for putting them through it?
So half of Scotland, I mean, I'm generalising here, it won't be exactly half and half, but a lot of Scotland desperately wanted me to do this, and actually their frustration with me is not that I tried, it's that I failed. Many people in the other half of Scotland, their frustration is that I tried at all. But I still believe in that period around 2017 to 2019, Scotland should have had a choice. And I didn't manage to give Scotland that choice, and I made misjudgments along the way in terms of timing and the emphasis and what I was trying to do.
You've lived this extraordinary political life with, you know, these astonishing electoral successes. 10 years as First Minister, 18 years with the SNP. Isn't the truth that the electoral success might have been there, but the success in governance and delivering what really matters day to day in people's lives, like the NHS, it simply has not delivered?
In 2020, of course, we did have a global pandemic. looking back on my time in office, and it's not meant to absolve me of my own failings, but my biggest frustration is that lack of any period where I just had a straight run.
You could have had a straighter run. You kept wanting to have a second independence referendum.
Well, that's fair comment, but that doesn't actually negate my point.
You could have been concentrating on those issues.
That is a fair point, but it doesn't negate the point I'm making. My desire to have another independence referendum, if that hadn't been there, I'd still have had to fight these 8 elections. I mean, 2 of them were snap UK general elections. One of them was a European election that was never meant to happen. I can only talk about the things I'm proud of and the things that I believe will stand the test of time. The Scottish Child Payment, which is, as we speak, lifting tens of thousands of kids out of poverty. Do I wish I had done more? Of course I do. And I try to be frank about that. But I am proud of the things that I did achieve.
You now have a scenario where a country which voted against Brexit, as you outlined earlier, is now witnessing the rise in support of Nigel Farage's party. You are pretty scathing about Nigel Farage in this book. Tell me what you say about him.
And this is my impression. Other people might have a different view of him. He just comes across as somebody who's got a very, very fragile ego, somebody who's not particularly comfortable, particularly around women.
I mean, you call him odious.
In the 2015 leaders' debate, just before we went on air that night, I just remember hearing him tell somebody how much he'd had to drink in the green rooms beforehand, and it just felt this kind of bravado and just not very pleasant. But, you know, that's my impression.
Why then is reform gaining such ground in Scotland?
I mean, that is... I mean, again, I'll do what will sound like a politician thing, which I keep having to school myself not to do. They're not doing as well in Scotland as they are in the rest of the UK.
Well, their poll rating has doubled in Scotland since the general election.
I'm not disputing any of that. I'm just giving a little bit of context, I suppose, is what I'm trying to do. Why? So I think, and I'm in the, some may say, luxurious position now. If I can think about these things, I can analyse them, I can come up with my theories about them, and I have no leadership responsibility for doing anything about it. And I think it's fair to just say that. Nigel Farage, or Trump in America, or many of these leaders in other countries,
who also called you out, terrible First Minister.
It's the greatest badge of honour I could ever have hoped for. But coming back to the sort of substantive point, what these guys, and with the exception of somebody like Giorgia Meloni in Italy, they are guys, what they're doing is tapping into what is a very real public mood of struggle and frustration. People are finding life really hard just now. There is a sense, and it's a sense that comes from a reality in many respects, that the bits of the country are just not working as they should be. Waiting times in the NHS are too long. The roads are not what they should be. So there's this sense that politics, democracy is not working, and they're tapping into that. Where I depart from them is that I think they are selling snake oil in terms of who they are blaming for that, and therefore the kind of solutions that they're offering. The problems in the UK, including in Scotland, are not caused by immigrants or refugees or by gay people or by the fact that women have too many rights. They're down to a deep fundamental breakdown in the system, the gap between the richest and the poorest, the fact that too much wealth is hoarded at the top.
You introduced legislation which fundamentally would make it easier for people to self-identify their gender instead of going down the medical route. You fought for that legislation, tooth and nail. Why did this matter to you so much? People look at it and they say, why did she choose this as the political hill to die on?
Well, I didn't. There was a hustings in the 2016 Scottish election where all of the party leaders committed to this policy. It had cross-party consensus. It wasn't seen as controversial. Scotland was not the first country in the world to go down this road. The Republic of Ireland, amongst about a dozen other countries, I think at the time, already had this as law. The UK government was proposing to do it at the time. So I think just to pause and remember that when this was first mooted, it was not the divisive, toxic, controversial issue it became. Trans people have always existed. They are amongst the most discriminated against and stigmatised groups in our society. And People can chuck as much hate and hostility at me on this issue as they choose.
But the bottom line was that debate became so toxic. How does it sit with you, such a passionate believer in this, that you may actually have made things worse for the lives of transgender people in Scotland?
No trans person has ever come to me and said, I really wish you hadn't tried to make life better. We really regret how it's all unfolded. I didn't, I think, anticipate as much as I should or engage as much as I should on some of the concerns that might then be triggered. At the point I knew it was becoming, or felt it becoming as polarised, I should have. I think I say in the book, I wonder if I should have. I'm going to say it categorically. I should have said, right, okay, let's pause. Let's take a step back. And because I fervently believe that the rights of women and the interests of trans people are not irreconcilable at all. I should have taken a step back and said, how do we achieve this in a way that...
So you're basically admitting that you should have just paused that legislation.
Yeah.
That you became unstuck over the questions about the transgender prisoner, the rapist, Isla Bryson. Why couldn't you answer that question?
I think I was caught up in the...
Will you answer it now, whether you believe Isla Bryson
Isla Bryson
was a man?
identified as a woman. I think what I would say now is anybody who commits the most heinous male crime against women probably forfeits the right to be, the gender of their choice.
They forfeit to be the gender of their choice. That's quite... I mean, this actually goes to the heart of the difficulty around this.
That probably was not the best phrase to use, but
they forfeit their right to be the gender
if you
of their
rape a
choice.
woman, then I think you probably, the debate about whether they should be called a woman or not, probably.
Well, why don't you simply say then Isla Bryson is a biological male?
They are a biological male, but that's about whether it gets back into the self-ID thing. I should have been much more straightforward. I wasn't. But that's because of the debate. We'd lost all sense of rationality in this debate. I'm partly responsible for that.
The reason I asked it is because the point you specifically make about it in the book is that this was a place where my acknowledged communication skills deserted me. And you say, I lost the dressing room.
Yeah, I totally did. And that was my failure. Anything I say about Isla Bryson in the wider world will immediately be taken and transferred to every trans person. And if I sometimes still seem as if I'm struggling with how to define Isla Bryson, it's not out of any concern for Isla Bryson, it's out of concern for how that then affects the wider trans community. And that is difficult. And I think it goes back to what I said was my biggest mistake in that whole thing, was not, and I should say in saying that, I'm not convinced it would have made a big difference at the time. But had I said, right, let's pause and see if we can find a better way, maybe we would have escaped some of the toxicity that we've had.
Alex Salmond. I mean, he looms large through the whole book. Whilst he was at Westminster, there were always rumours swirling about affairs, but no hint of anything connected to the allegations that would come. So you stand by the fact that at that point you had no idea that he was capable of that sort of behaviour? Alleged behaviour.
I have examined my soul over this so many times because the answer to that is no. I had no idea that there was any suggestion of inappropriate, non-consensual, whatever term you want to use. And I've asked myself, is that absolutely the case, or did you just willfully not see it? And I can honestly sit here and say, no, I did not have any sense of that. Do I believe he behaved inappropriately? That's different to criminally. Inappropriately on some occasions towards women, I believe that. And where I believe there has been an injustice towards women is that instead of acknowledging that and showing contrition and apologising for that, he doubled down. He traumatised all over again women by doing that. And that, even now that he's no longer here, that's the bit I can't get over, I can't forgive. And there are still people on his behalf accusing me of orchestrating this big conspiracy against him. And you might say, well, I'm a politician, but in the course of that, he was effectively accusing women of making up lies about him.
He died very suddenly.
Yeah.
I was hit by a wave of emotion much stronger than I would have anticipated. Why? And what was that?
So, at the point he died, I hadn't spoken to him for years. I felt really deeply the loss of the relationship with him. I suddenly didn't have him. He wasn't there. I couldn't talk to him. And I went through this period of, I would still talk to him in my head. I would have vivid dreams that we were still on good terms. And then I'd have this feeling of such sadness when I remembered the reality. So I went through that process. I still missed him in some bizarre way. Even today, I still miss him in some way, the person that I used to know and the relationship we used to have. But I thought I had made my peace with it, that I'd got to a point where I felt nothing. And then I got a call to tell me that Alex Salmond had died. And I started crying on the phone, and I just was hit by this wave of grief. And it was complicated because obviously we weren't just no longer friends, we were political enemies. There was no prospect I was going to be able to go to his funeral or anything like that. Yeah, it was a kind of strange feeling.
I just want to ask you about the COVID inquiry. Many people were quite taken aback to see how emotional that you were. There were some, though, that were really scathing of your appearance at that inquiry. And to be clear, there were some pretty serious criticisms made of the way you'd handled it. The former Scotland Secretary Alistair Jack said that you could cry out of one eye. He didn't believe the emotion.
I suspect he did believe it. It just suited his politics better to say it was all fake. If people want to believe that I'm the kind of person that sits at a public inquiry after trying to lead a country to the best of my abilities through a global pandemic, if they want to believe that I'm going to sit in forced tears in a pub, then they're never going to believe anything else. So I'll not waste too much energy trying to convince them otherwise.
And the reality of it is that you needed therapy after the COVID inquiry.
It was in the few weeks after that inquiry appearance that I fell to my lowest level. I just lost all perspective on things, and I actually started to believe. I think I use this phrase in the book. All the worst caricatures of myself that my political opponents would throw at me, I internalised them and I started to believe them. I started to believe, I was responsible for every death. Alistair Jack would certainly have something to say about this moment. And I couldn't lift myself out of it. So it was a friend, actually, who persuaded me to do something I had never done in my life before. I'd never felt the need to do it before, of see a counsellor. And it really helped. But yeah, that was a tough time. And I actually, in fact, I'm being reminded right now that I don't know whether she'll have got to this bit in the book yet, but I hadn't even told my mum that I'd had counselling. So I must remember to tell her before she gets to this bit in the book.
So your mum doesn't know that you had to seek some therapy?
So
we need to talk about another really tough passage in your life. You talk about the miscarriage in the most painstaking detail.
To this day, and possibly forever, I carry a sense of guilt that I miscarried the baby because I had been conflicted about the pregnancy, and that I maybe at points wasn't sure that I wanted to be pregnant. There were some days where I kind of wished I wasn't. And the reason for that is because of the timing of getting pregnant, and it was very close to the 2011 Scottish election. SNP would be going for re-election. I would have been 6 months pregnant at the time. And it might sound odd now, but even back then, there weren't any senior women in politics who'd had a baby in office. So I didn't know how it would go down with the public. Will I be able to cope? What if I've got terrible morning sickness? And this just was all racing through my head. And I had this ambivalence, and that's putting it mildly, for the period So this was in about October, and I miscarried just at the turn of the year. And I was constantly trying to sort of pretend to Peter that I was excited as he was. And I still carry a bit of that guilt. If I had been genuinely happy with the pregnancy, if I genuinely wanted it unequivocally and unambiguously, if I hadn't had all those moments of wishing I hadn't been pregnant, would the miscarriage not have happened? Was that my punishment for not? And it's totally irrational. I get how irrational that is.
You write about it in extraordinary detail.
I was in the toilet, and I'm not going to get into the graphic detail, but effectively, and I've heard other women describe it like this as well, I managed to call Peter through, and effectively we flushed what would have become our child down the toilet.
You vividly imagined this baby that you lost. Name, who she was. Just tell me that bit that you wrote about her.
I always felt it was a girl. Maybe that was just a bit of wishful thinking, because I would have probably preferred a daughter. I can see her in my mind's eye. Dark hair, dark eyes. She'd be 14 now. So it's a bizarre thing for somebody who, I've never had that overwhelming maternal yearning. I don't feel incomplete because I don't have a child. And yet that little girl I can totally conjure up in my mind and still feel a sense of loss over and guilt. She's a part of my story.
Yeah. How did Peter cope with it?
He was really upset and devastated. He'd been really... And you know what? Just strip out everything that's happened since, because I don't want to go into that, and I can't go into that, but I think he'd have been a good dad. Until he was devastated. But I think two things. One, he was very worried and sort of solicitous about me at the time, and I think was probably more focused on how I was coping than, and I guess that's probably a common experience for men in these situations. I think he thought it wasn't necessarily the end of that journey, that we might, have another chance.
So we're standing here at this place that you treasure so much, and there must be moments when you look down onto that beach and almost, come here 50 years ago, and you might have seen there's a little girl playing on that beach, and I'm sure you've thought about this. You have made, as you outline in some detail in the book, some really big personal sacrifices along the way. What would you say to the little girl on that beach? And what would you tell her to do differently?
So I think what I'd tell her to do differently, and she probably wouldn't have listened and probably would have paid zero attention to it. But I think and I try to convey this in the book, I think the price I paid for that lack of confidence, that shyness, introversion, which, believe it or not, is still there, was that I took myself overly seriously. I probably sacrificed more than I had to, because I thought if I didn't give it all, then, I wouldn't succeed because I wasn't really good enough. So I had to work harder, be more committed, be more dedicated than anybody around me to make up for that lack of confidence. And out of that, I think, I put off having kids until a point where it didn't happen. And so I'd probably say to her, do everything, grasp it, go for it, throw yourself into it. But you know what? You don't have to forgo everything else along the way. You can possibly still do some of the other stuff that I didn't do.
You say quite starkly, if my life is ever less chaotic, in the future, fostering a child is something I'd like to consider. I suppose it's quite a nice spot to think about that, isn't it? Can you ever imagine, how will that happen? How do you imagine that happening?
To be honest, I don't know. I would love to think it might be possible at some point, and it often struck me that fostering a child would be something, when I was out of politics, that I'd love to to think about doing. But I learned something else during that time that I think is really, really important to hold on to, is that fostering a vulnerable child is not something you should do to, fulfill some need in you or for selfish reasons. It should only be if you think you can offer a child the right environment to grow up in. And I suppose I would love to think that at some point I could do that I could maybe bring a child here to this beach and, show them the wonders I had as a kid. I guess the doubt in my mind is that, will my life ever be calm and private enough to provide that kind of safe, secure, stable environment for a child? And I guess if I'm being asked to sort of say yea or nay to that right now, I would say I find that hard to imagine. I don't know, I think about my life, and even taking it into hopefully calmer waters than it's been in recent years. Is that ever going to be calm enough for a child? I'd love to say yes, but right now I think it is maybe unlikely. But it's something I don't think I'll ever, certainly not for the foreseeable future, I don't think I'll ever quite let go of it as a possibility in my own mind.
And just being in this spot, I suppose, is a space for imagining things.
Absolutely, definitely.
You write in the book, "I have never considered sexuality, mine own included, to be binary." What do you mean by that?
I mean what it says. It's just my view of the world and life and the way people are. If you're about to ask me, am I making some big revelation? No. Am I putting labels on myself? No. That's how I see the world.
Might we see you in a relationship with a woman?
I'm just out of a marriage, so I'm not rushing into a relationship with anyone anytime soon. I'm enjoying being my own person for a while.
But not ruling it out.
I'm not contemplating, sort of anything of that nature. I'm just enjoying life. That's part of the answer to that question. The other part of the answer is, in future, I possibly want to choose to have any relationships I happen to be in as private matters, not ones that I share with the media, even with you.
Was it quite liberating to write that line?
The process of writing this whole book has been liberating, because for the first time I've been able to tell my story in my words, and I've been able to choose the words I use.
And exploring your sexuality is part of that, is
all sorts of things. And it is a chapter that is yet unwritten. So if I'm writing things that seem really definitive or whatever, I'm at a stage, and I do feel a real sense of liberation.
I've got a couple more things I want to talk to you about. The picture you paint in this book, whatever the highs and lows and some of those great moments of success, is that this was an entire career plagued with misogyny. At one point, there was one particular man made your life so bad in the Scottish Parliament, quite early in the career, which left you in tears in the ladies' bathroom. Just navigating that stuff over this long career that you've had, why would any woman want to go into politics?
Because if we don't get women going into politics, then it will still all be men. If we don't get people with the right motivations going into politics, it will be full of people with the bad motivations. All of that said, so I will still encourage women to go into politics. All of that said, politics, public life generally, is much more difficult for women today, despite all the advances we've made, than it was when I was starting out. And that's largely down to social media and everything that's come with that.
One of your driving missions coming into politics was in reaction to Margaret Thatcher. There have been people that looked at the figure that you were in Scottish politics, and to some extent still are, because you still elicit such strong responses in some people. A strong female leader who brooked very little opposition, who drove through reforms which were splitting her party, left her party in a mess, had moments of hubris when you admit you felt you could walk on political water. Are there more similarities between you and Margaret Thatcher than I'm sure that you would care to admit?
Maybe, I don't know. Not politically. I look back now and, I mean, she was a woman leader in a different time to me. But she must have suffered a lot of the same things. But for example, the fact that I brooked little opposition, it's not really true.
Oh, come on, you expected the SNP to follow where you led exactly the same way that she governed, surely.
Pretty happy I didn't lose an election for the SNP in all my time as leader. I think I could possibly have gone on winning elections, but that will never be put to the test. But the point I'm making is that, yeah, there's criticisms that can be made of me, but often things that, like strong, decisive leadership, that in men are seen as attributes, you know, the things that qualify them for leadership, you put those same things in a woman and they become character flaws. And that is not me saying that none of these criticisms are fair. But when I was younger, it used to be said to me, she never smiles, she's dour, she's... You know, things that are never said about men. Women are judged on what we wear, how we look, hair, tone of voice, depth of voice. I don't think there are many similarities in substance between me and Margaret Thatcher. But in how we're characterised, some of it may be coming from truths, but how we're characterised, yeah, maybe there are some similarities there, because assessments of politicians and leaders are absolutely very gendered.
Slight handbrake turn to a completely separate subject. The royal family. But you do say something very striking. And you talk a lot too about the fact that clearly the late Queen died in Scotland. So there was a part of royal family history which was unfolding on your watch, which was, you know, an extraordinary moment. And you talk about that in detail. You then say, history will judge the late Queen's death as the beginning of the end of the royal family. Why?
I think I say in that sentence, however long that might be, because I don't know whether I'm really meaning here 10 years or 100 years. I just think, and having seen the royal family up closer than most of the population get to do, there was something about the Queen. And it was partly her and her personality. There was a mystique about the Queen. I had audiences at Balmoral with her. We would then go down for drinks downstairs and I would usually go ahead of her. And I could have my back to the door in the room and you would know when she'd walked in. It was almost like something in the air shifted. And I think a lot of the royal family or the institution of monarchy, its sustainability, I think, rests a little bit on that sense of mystique and mystery.
So you think it's lost or losing the mystique?
I don't think... I respect other members of the royal family. I'm not making... This is not meant to be a kind of pejorative, critical comment about them, but none of the rest of them have that the way the Queen did. I think over time, and this is where I don't know whether we're talking about 10, 100 years or somewhere in between, I think over time, without that, which the Queen brought, I guess people focus more on the reasons maybe not to have a royal family than the reasons to have a royal family. History may prove me completely wrong on this, but that's just how I feel about it.
You've got a tattoo.
Midlife crisis alert.
Midlife crisis alert. Show us the tattoo, Nicola Sturgeon, and what that is.
So, I mean, what it is known really only to me, but I'll give you a kind of sense of it. It's kind of an infinity symbol with an arrow, and I came up with the design myself. In summary, what it signifies to me is strength, resilience, and continuing to move forward, even when it feels impossible. And I've spent 50 plus years of my life never imagining I would get a tattoo, and then suddenly I decided I'd really like a tattoo. And got it a couple of months ago. My mother, I don't think, believed me when I told her. Even when I sent her a photograph, I think she thought it was just a joke, a temporary thing. And yeah, I've only had it for a couple of months and I still forget it's there. I now forget it's there, but I don't know. It's meant, when I look at it, it's just, I suppose it's just a symbol for me, and it's only for me, of kind of coming through stuff and still standing. And it might not be my last one, now that I've got the taste for it.
Oh, right, there may be more tattoos. Where's next, then?
I don't know.
Maybe we don't need to know.
So, looking to the future now, you talk about even contemplating leaving this country. This is a place you've literally given your sort of energy, soul, years and years of your life to, why would you want to leave it?
I don't want to leave it. I mean, this is where I belong, and I don't think I'll ever be long out of Scotland. But I think Scotland, for me, still feels very much like a goldfish bowl. There's still a huge amount of scrutiny on me, understandably so. I'm writing a book, I can hardly complain about it. But at times it feels that it's very difficult to breathe freely here. And I think just maybe even a few months somewhere else just to reset myself and then come back and feel differently about that side of things might do me good.
Whereabouts then?
I don't know. I've spent some people will be astonished to hear me say this. I've spent a bit more time than I've ever done before in London, so maybe a few months in London. I don't know.
When you mean leaving Scotland,
I mean going overseas to England.
Going overseas to England. I mean, that's an insight in itself. So you might land in London then.
I might for a while.
Do you think that it's a more comfortable place to be in? That London, Scotland's had enough?
A couple of years ago, I might have said America, but I'm not sure that is the best place. Given the pot shot that Trump took at me recently, I'm not sure that's the best place for me to pitch up. And I'm now looking forward to, I guess, chapter 2 of my life. And what I love about where I am right now is that sense of freedom, that I might not leave Scotland, but it's an option, and I've got the freedom to do it if I want to.
Hang on a minute. I mean, a lot of people will hear you say, I might go and live in London, after all of the, I mean, frankly, political war that you've waged against
Westminster.
Exactly. Well,
not against the place.
No, not against the place. A lot of people will think that's astonishing, given that everything that Westminster has stood for, that you have fought for.
Westminster's not London, and London's not Westminster.
No, I understand that point, but for you to suddenly want to actually be in England's capital, for a lot of people will be bemusing or shocking.
Maybe it shouldn't be, and maybe that's part of my fault in terms of, the
way you
political
characterised
project.
it.
Well, no, I absolutely refute the sense that I ever characterised London, the place, or England. My grandmother, who lived, down there and up there, was English and, was born and spent her childhood in the north of England. So I've never characterised England in that way, and never would. I'm part English in terms of my DNA, but I don't know that it should surprise people.
If and when there is ever another independence referendum campaign,
hold me back.
Well, you'd be back.
I'll be back.
You would be back into politics for that, for sure, wouldn't you?
No, politics with a small p. Totally. Wherever I happen to be in the world, when there is another independence referendum, I'll be here.
If the SNP wanted you back to lead a campaign on that,
I think there's lots of hypotheticals in that, but in whatever capacity it might be, when there's another independence referendum, I'll be here campaigning, giving it my all to make sure we get the result next time that we didn't quite manage last time.